Hello, this is Greg Allison Green Greg's coming to you on 18 March 22. Time on deck is 1500 hours Central Daylight Time. My friends, we're trying to establish a process for peace in Ukraine and hopefully to avert World War III. And to that end, I bring you special guest David Pyne. You might have saw I posted a video just earlier today about a Doomsday machine called the Dead Hand Switch, which is in the possession of Russia today. Something that's a bit concerning. There's a lot of reasons we do not want to go to war with Russia. And that's the reason I posted that, just to get it in your mind that we really do not want to go down this road. So I'll bring you this along with many other videos as part of my Eyes Wide Open, Head on a Swivel series, so that you'll know to be aware of what's coming up. You can share this stuff with your friends so you'll know that one. Here's one thing a lot of people don't get. They think I'm fear mongering. My videos always toward the end, I always strive to put something in that we can do to prevent the thing I talk about in the video. That's why I put these videos out. Is the first order is to prevent it. The second order is to be prepared in case it takes place anyway. And a lot of things are taking place. A lot of things are happening now. Some things I think inflation is cooked in the books. How much it becomes maybe a variable thing, but we got a lot of things coming at us, my friends. So do be prepared for these things. Watch my videos, subscribe to my channel, bang the notification bell, and click all so you can be aware of these things. And by the way, right now we've got a really good special deal. I don't know how long this is going to last because of the inflation problems, but we still have, if you go to prepwithgreg.com, you can still get at the same price as last month, a special, and the same special, you can get $150 off a 3-month supply of food that lasts 25 years, 3 months. That's 6 of these buckets. Each one's 2 weeks. And you can get a month off, a month supply for 2 weeks, that is, for $50 off. That's an amazing deal right now. It won't last long. So get it while the getting's good. Inflation's kicking up. And look at it as an investment. With inflation going the way it is, 10 years down the road, if you haven't needed it, and which would be a good thing, it might be money in the bank. So and check the My Patriot Supply logo, because they got all kind of prepping supplies in there, including water and air filtration systems. And guys, if there is a nuclear war and a nuclear winter, you're going to need a long-term food storage, because you're not going to be able to grow anything for a few years, most likely. David, you coming today again with another plan. We talked about this in the past, what to do to try to avert war with Ukraine and potential war with Russia. And it started anyway. So what do we do now?
Well, let me first thank you for the opportunity to be on your show again and to have a discussion with you and help educate your guests about the issues that we're facing today, which, as Dr. Peter Pry, our executive director here in the EMP task force, has pointed out, is a crisis that's more dangerous to the U.S. than even the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962. So the situation we face right now, of course, Russia did invade Ukraine as I predicted. I predicted February 20th would be the date. They ended up invading Ukraine 2 days later. I also predicted that their invasion would be rapid, hard-hitting. They employ a massive cyber attack. And a lot of that hasn't happened. So we've seen a much slower Russian advance. They haven't made all that much progress over the past week or two, but they are on the verge of surrounding the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. And a lot of, but there's what I wanted to point out is there's been a huge amount of misinformation which has been propagated by the left. Which is essentially Ukrainian war propaganda. Some of it is, concerns Ukrainian victories. There was the story of the ghost of Kyiv. Supposedly, on the first few days of the war, he shot down 6 Russian MiGs. Turns out that was just a video game clip. There was another story about Ukrainian defenders on Snake Island that told a Russian invasion force to F off. That turned out to be completely false. Most recently, there was a story of a major Russian warship, a large frigate that was sunk by the Ukrainians. And we recently saw pictures of that ship undamaged in the Crimea. So there's a lot of lies. A lot of people are believing false things. The main narrative that we see in the liberal media today, and even on Fox News, is Russia is deliberately targeting civilians on a systematic scale. They're committing war crimes. None of that is true. Certainly, in any war, there is collateral damage. There's a huge moral differentiation between deliberately targeting enemy civilians and in war, and targeting military targets that may happen to be in a civilian building, and then having civilian collateral casualties. So I'm afraid that U.S. policymakers are proceeding, supporting policies that could prove extremely destructive to our country, not only economically in terms of causing a global food crisis and various other supply chain shortages, which alone could have a massive blowback to our economy and cause another economic recession. But more importantly, in risking nuclear war with Russia, as Russian President Putin has repeatedly declared his willingness to use nuclear weapons if we continue to fight this economic war against Russia to collapse his economy and perhaps even try to overthrow his regime.
Hey, David, could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I get a lot of people telling me that he's made no such threats, that there's nothing like that in the offing, but yet I'm seeing it. So if you could elaborate on that, it might be a little helpful for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So on day one, when he announced his declaration of war in his special combat mission in Ukraine, he warned the Western powers not to interfere, not to send military forces to Ukraine, or else they would face the more serious consequences that they've ever had experienced before. The next day, President Biden, he clearly identified what he thought that meant, and that was massive cyber attacks on U.S. critical infrastructure. And he warned President Putin in response that if Russia were to engage in those types of attacks in the 16 red line areas of our critical infrastructure that Biden had redlined back last summer, that Biden would respond with major cyber attacks on Russian critical infrastructure targets, which, by the way, Russia has clearly spelled out in their military doctrine would evoke a nuclear response. That's one of the main rationales for their escalation to the nuclear level. And then on the 28th of February, I believe, we saw President Putin announce that he was putting his strategic nuclear forces on high alert and special combat duty. Dr. Price has stated that he believes that was essentially an announcement of Russia escalating its alert status for its strategic nuclear weapons to their equivalent of DEFCON 2 or DEFCON 3. In the meantime, Biden has pretty much blew off the whole Russian nuclear alert as bluff. And according to Dr. Pry, we're still at DEFCON 5 in terms of our nuclear alert status, which is, I would say, almost criminal. I mean, the Russians could easily conduct a nuclear first strike, and we would not be prepared in any way to retaliate. So that's President Biden is doing a number of things which I call a policy of national suicide. He's leading our nation off the cliff, and 98% of Republicans are cheerleading him on and supporting his destructive policies towards our country.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is we've got Republicans like Lindsey Graham and a senator from, I believe, Idaho, who are both calling for us to strike Russia. And one of them, I think Graham, one of them actually called for assassination of Putin. We've got calls for no fly zone to be established from both sides. We've got, but on the other side, there are members of the Duma in Russia, which is their equivalent to our Congress, that are calling for strikes on the United States, including nuclear strikes. And one is called for in particular, he's called for a demonstration shot. He thinks that they could use one of their hypersonic missiles to fire a nuke into our Nevada test area. As long as it's our test area, and they announce and tell us that we won't respond. And maybe he's right. Would we respond and commit to a nuclear war over a demonstration shot, a warning shot into our test area. And I guarantee, and I would imagine we won't see it coming. It will just be standing around and it'll go boom if they do that. So it would be a very stark thing to happen, but I believe it's within the realms of capabilities that these hypersonic missiles are built to evade our detection systems, our radars, which are mostly looking for things coming over the poles. And we do have coastal radars, but if it comes in low enough, I think it could evade them. They're not that I don't think they're that good at systems compared to what's watching over the poles. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, that's absolutely true. So according to Presidential Decision Directive 60, signed by Bill Clinton, President Clinton back in 1997, the official U.S. policy is to launch on impact, meaning that we would we would not be able to retaliate against an incoming nuclear strike either from Russia, China, or North Korea without first confirming a nuclear impact upon U.S. soil. And thus, absolutely, he's absolutely right. If Russia were to launch a nuclear attack against a unpopulated area, the U.S. would have absolutely no nuclear response whatsoever to that. Furthermore, there's a very high risk that a lot of people don't realize that the longer the war in Ukraine goes on, the longer it takes Russia to win, then the more likely that Putin will resort to the use of tactical nuclear weapons to quote unquote escalate to de-escalate in accordance with Russian military doctrine. And if he were to do that, there was actually a seminar that I watched. I didn't participate in it myself, but I observed it, and they talked about how in the event that happened, a survey of former senior both senior State Department and Defense Department officials said was unanimous in saying that the U.S. would not likely respond to a tactical nuclear attack on a non-NATO country by Russia. Actually, if they were used on a NATO country, we would most likely not respond in kind, but we would try to de-escalate. And obviously, if that happens, it's going to change a lot of things. There's a huge amount of misinformation about nuclear war. Nuclear wars can be fought and won. A lot of it depends on the scale. A lot of it depends on who launches first. In the event of a limited tactical nuclear war, the damage would be would be much more limited than people realize, and it would be unlikely to escalate to a strategic nuclear exchange, providing that it was the Russians or the Chinese that first used tactical nuclear weapons rather than the U.S. Because if the U.S. were to use those against Russia or China, they'd be guaranteed to hit us hard with a full nuclear strike.
Well, okay, so yeah, I wasn't planning to bring that up myself. That it is in the doctrine of the Russians that if they're losing even a tactical battle on the battlefield, to resort to tactical nuclear weapons, and they have a lot more tactical nuclear weapons than we do in our forces. We've cut our tactical weapons back very considerably compared to them. We've had, I think in Europe, we might have 150, 200 weapons totally that might fit in that category, whereas they got something like, what is the number? It's like 1,600. It's a pretty good number. I just saw that earlier today.
They have up to 5,000 tactical nuclear weapons, of which half of those are optimized sub-kiloton battlefield nuclear weapons, which have an explosive equivalence of between 100 and 1,000 tons of TNT. And those are a lot of those are specially designed new generation warheads that Dr. Pry has talked about that emit very little radiation, very little fallout, and so essentially enabling Russia to fire those, to breach enemy defenses and destroy battlefield units, and essentially just ride around the blast radius, drive their tanks around the blast radius without any concern about potential radioactive effects.
Oh, then does Russia have neutron bombs? Is that what you're talking about?
They also have neutron bombs. Yeah, they built neutron bombs. I think we had neutron bombs
one time, yeah,
during the briefly during the Reagan era, but of course President George H.W. Bush ordered almost all, most of our tactical nuclear weapons to be dismantled. But yeah, they do have neutron warheads. Neutron warheads are actually have an increased radioactive effect. They're designed to kill more people, or rather more troops, while preserving the infrastructure in place. So that's most likely not a weapon that the Russians would use in this war.
Yeah, but it's mostly stuff with short half-life, though. With most of the products of the neutron bomb, is it not? I mean, it's maximizing neutrons, so, as opposed to electrons and so forth. I don't know. So it'd be interesting to see. No, well, we don't want to see that. But anyway, so given that, we've got a situation. What do we do to change where we're at? What do we do to get a peace process established that actually could hold? I mean, Zelensky has said that the Russians are listening, that they're having negotiations. I guess we've heard it from the Russian side, but they're talking maybe something in May if they agree with it. In the meantime, both sides are fighting hard at it. So it's just talk right now. What makes this go actual?
So this is actually was the subject of my recent piece in the National Interest this past week. Just several days ago, it was published. I published a piece called "How Biden Can End the War in Ukraine," and essentially what it said is, the Russians have been they've offered their peace terms the day after they invaded. I mean, Putin he wanted to make it very clear, if you meet these peace terms, agree these peace terms, we'll pull our forces out of most of Ukraine. So it's the Ukrainians have known what the specific peace terms have been for quite some time, and I believe they've had 4 meetings thus far, mid-level Russian and Ukrainian delegates. They have made substantial progress. And the Russians have actually rolled back their demands. They initially were calling for Zelensky's ouster, probably the banning of his political party that would result in the need for snap elections for a caretaker Ukrainian president, and then preferably the installation of some kind of Russian puppet government. But so they've dropped that, realizing that that's a non-starter. You can't negotiate, a compromise peace treaty with an enemy, with a foreign leader, in which your first demand is you have to resign, or leave power. So they've given that up. It looks like they are willing to compromise on Ukrainian EU membership. They also appear willing to compromise in terms of the level of disarmament of the Ukrainian armed forces.
That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah, that's big as well.
I can't see the Ukrainians wanting to lay down all their arms, realizing that Russia could come back and whoop on them again whenever they decided to. So if Russia's willing to do that, why can't? It looks to me like they should be able to cinch a deal.
Yeah, and the Biden administration has been so foolish in terms of the day after they invaded, they essentially they'd already told the Russians to drop dead over their proposed peace treaty back in late January. And that's when I became really fearful that something, some bad things were going to happen, because you don't tell a nuclear superpower to drop dead. You tell them you make some limited concessions, like Ronald Reagan did. Ronald Reagan, and JFK, a lot of people don't realize this. JFK gave up more than he got back in terms of concessions to resolve the last major nuclear crisis, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, in which he agreed never to invade Cuba. The U.S. would never invade Cuba, and then we would pull back all of our Thor MRBMs out of Turkey in exchange for a Russian withdrawal of their MRBMs, nuclear missiles, from Cuba. And based on the records that I've studied, the Russians didn't even keep their deal. They left nuclear missiles in Cuba until they realized that, with Castro having limited launch authority, he was a little bit too crazy for their liking. And so they ended up pulling them all out in the late 60s in that time frame. But that's an example of how we would resolve this major type of crisis. You know, we give serious concessions, the Russians give serious concessions in return. That's what, you know, Reagan, the whole idea of peace through strength is based on, you know, we're going to use our military strength and our to ensure peace, you know, through negotiated peace agreements. It's not peace through strength. If we get involved in a war with Russia, right? It's not peace through strength. It's war through weakness, essentially, because we are the U.S. has unilaterally disarmed itself of 94% of our nuclear deterrent to date, including 84% of our strategic nuclear deterrent. And so we're in a much weaker position than we were at the end of the Cold War.
And this goes back to this, you know, we wait until we absorb a first strike from the opponent. What the heck you got left at that point? I mean, their first target is going to be take out every SAC base, they're going to hammer every single missile launch silo we got with, you know, subsurface nuclear blast and NORAD and our command structure in Washington, D.C. I mean, they would hammer, and our submarine ports. What would be left? What would we have left after a first strike?
The first nuclear hit we would absorb would be Washington, D.C. So the nuclear command authority.
Whoa. You know, a lot of Americans would call that urban renewal. If that's all they hit, we might clap our hands and celebrate.
Yeah, well, that'd be one way to achieve regime change, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of DC. No, it's very serious business. It's not a laughing matter, but yeah, that exposes the total ridiculousness of the idea of a nuclear policy of launch on impact versus you know, Reagan's launch on warning, which is that's what we need to be able to have a credible nuclear deterrent posture. We simply have to have a launch on warning posture.
It has to be a launch on warning.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to verify, know they're really coming, but without launch on warning, you're dead. You're over. You're finished. What's the point in having anything if that's your policy? That's a lame brain policy. But we see where peace through weakness has got us. We're in war, basically. We're not directly in it yet, but it's been an invitation to war. It's been an invitation for people to storm our stuff in Afghanistan. Peace through weakness is you know, if you're the weak kid on the playground, you're going to get beat up, and your candy and your lunch money both will be taken from you. And that's what's happened in the United States. We've had our candy taken, our lunch money taken, and we're being beat on just for the fun of it.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Biden's debacle in Afghanistan, the way he withdrew from Afghanistan and wouldn't even allow our own military to rescue the thousands of U.S. citizens that were trapped behind enemy lines before we withdrew, definitely, you know, caused Russia and China to double down on their plans to launch aggressions against the U.S. and our allies this year. I mean, sir, I believe they had those intentions as soon as Biden was elected. The evidence shows that Putin actually gave orders to Russian forces to prepare to invade Ukraine at the end of 2020. That would be right after Biden was elected president. So certainly that's been an issue. But yeah, we've the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems that we have right now is that we have neoconservative Republicans that have essentially overturned, you know, Trump, all the good that Trump accomplished with his America First conservative policy that put U.S. national security first and kept us out of wars, you know, wars abroad. They're being successful in overturning that, and so we don't really have a loyal opposition that is you know, siding with America. You know, our entire political leadership class in Congress and the White House have essentially become appendages of the president of Ukraine, and whatever he says he wants to do, well, that's what we support. If he supports fighting this war for months on end and bleeding Russia dry, then we're committed. We have to do that. We just simply have to do that in order to, you know, support world democracy or some other nebulous thing like that, instead of doing what's right and what's best for America. And that is to end this war as quickly as possible, to avoid it spreading to the U.S. and NATO, and then escalating to the cyber EMP or nuclear level, which is an existential threat to the United States. Russia and China are allies, they're military allies, but I'm sure China would want nothing more than for the US to get in a cyber EMP or nuclear war that ends up destroying our country, even just severely damaging and destabilizing our country, so that they could go ahead and invade Taiwan unopposed. A lot of neoconservatives like Lindsey Graham and Mitt Romney don't realize this. They don't realize that the more invested we become in fighting, escalating our war with Russia, our undeclared war with Russia, the greater the chances for, and the more emboldened the Chinese will be to invade Taiwan and perhaps other nations in the Far East and Pacific Rim as well.
And it goes for North Korea and South Korea. And China's targeted quite a few other nations. They've been aggressive toward Japan and India, for that matter, and even the Philippines. The Philippines under Durante had kind of looked the other way for a while, but the people there are not happy with that. So, well, we're in the sobering times here. They're very sobering. We got a lot to ponder, and you might just for the record, I know we told about who you were in our last video, but once again, tell everybody about your experience with the Army, negotiating and working in the European theater. You come to the table here with a lot of experience in this realm. So just the purposes of record, to kind of update our people on that. I should have started out with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I served as a U.S. Army combat arms officer in the 90s, and thereafter I was served on the U.S. Army headquarters staff. My position was essentially as a country desk officer in charge of all U.S. Army R&D cooperative agreements with the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, as well as the Americas and Africa. I had a very, very wide portfolio. And part of that reason is, well, the main part of that reason is that we didn't do a whole lot of business with those countries. Some of my fellow GS-14 and Lieutenant Colonel equivalents at the time, their portfolio was France and Germany, 2 countries, but we did tons of business. So they'd fly to those countries all the time. But I did travel internationally, and I, as either the lead or the second most senior U.S. Army representative on Department of Defense delegations, meeting with other nations' ministries of defense to negotiate these types of agreements. So actually, my whole career, since then I've been a defense contractor negotiating agreements right now internationally. I don't want to talk about exactly who I work for, but my focus is international agreements. And so I've as a military historian, someone who has studied World War II and World War I and other conflicts over the past 40 or more years, I've been able to learn how to end conflicts and end them in a just way that preserves the peace. I'm actually writing an article right now that I'm about to submit to the national interest that talks about how we could have ended World War I in a compromised peace and avoided the rise of Hitler, the Nazis, and perhaps even prevented the Soviets from taking over Russia. And we could have completely averted the communist China and North Korea from ever existing. And that's kind of a model, this type of just negotiated compromise peace that we could have done in World War I is kind of the model for what we need today. A peace that recognizes the legitimate security interests of Russia that in Ukraine, but that also safeguards the U.S. and our NATO allies at the same time, while preserving Ukrainian political and economic independence. And I believe that's achievable. But the issue is the Russian peace terms are never going to be more lenient than they are right now. If we force them to, lose a few thousand lives in taking the capital of Kyiv and other major Russian cities, Putin's going to be a lot less willing to give in on important points, as we discussed, like Zelensky staying in power.
That's an important point. That's true. If he takes more, he's going to give less. But it may be also go counter if it's possible that Ukraine could hold off longer. But that's when you get into the realm of perhaps the use of tactical nukes. So It's probably as good as it gets right now. So given that, what would you have Biden do? I mean, we can't control Zelensky directly, at least you and I can't, but we can definitely call the administration and chew their ears off, burn up the phone lines. What would you suggest that Biden do different? What should he do and be proactive in?
So it's the U.S. national security interest to incentivize both Russia and Ukraine to be willing to agree to peace, to end the war, to compromise in a way that that both sides can accept. The way to do that would be, number one, we should immediately suspend all armaments shipments to Ukraine, and Biden should have a frank discussion with Ukrainian President Zelensky and tell him, look, we support you, but we need to end this war as quickly as possible. And the Russians are very serious about a peaceful termination to the conflict. That we need to find compromise. And many of their terms we believe are reasonable. And it's in our interest that you end the war as quickly as possible. And then at the same time, Biden could tell Russia that if they were to have a ceasefire, if they were negotiate a peace deal, that the U.S. would roll back its sanctions and its troop levels in Eastern Europe to the same level they were at prior to the invasion. Actually, I would say prior to December 2001. Back in 2021, just last December, our troop levels were at 5,000 in Eastern Europe. Currently, there are at least 20,000, perhaps even 25,000. So if we could make a deal with Russia subsequent to that peace deal ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, that says, Russia will pull its troops out of 94% of Ukraine and will reduce its troop levels in Belarus to 9,000. Then NATO will do the same. We'll reduce our troops in Eastern Europe to 9,000. And then ideally, we'd want to have them agree to demilitarize all of Belarus, pull out all of their nuclear forces and conventional forces. And then we should do the same. A lot of people say, oh, that's what they asked for in their security agreement. They were trying to roll us back to the pre-1997 when Eastern Europe wasn't part of NATO. And that's absolutely not true. Putin hasn't asked for one country to leave NATO. So we can retain all 30 countries and satisfy Russian security concerns. And the way we do that is we go back to the pre-2016 deployments of NATO, in which we had 0 troops. We had 0 US troops and 0 Western NATO forces in Eastern Europe. And that's not as radical an idea as people might think. And we could have a threat that if Russia were to resend forces to Belarus, for example, for more than perhaps 30 days, that we would immediately surge our forces in Eastern Europe and resume the same deployments. And of course, if they did that in Ukraine, we would immediately resume our severe economic sanctions against Russia. So we need to have.
Let's recap on that a little bit, so people get where you're coming from. What David is saying is that as Russia's asked us not to have forward deployments in the border NATO nations, he's saying let's ask the same, that they not have the same kind of deployments in Belarus. It's tit for tat. You don't want us here, you don't be here. You go here, we come there. There's a certain bit of fairness to that. It's kind of like an Italian negotiation with the gangsters. So that has a that has some traction. But right now, I don't even think Putin's asking for that. Of course, we might want to see him. We might want to ask that, just see him pull out of Belarus. But right now, he's focused on what he wants from Zelensky, and that is the assurance that they will not join NATO, which he seems to be agreeable to now. There may be a certain amount of demilitarization, but he's talking like he's willing to let them keep their military. So I don't see why we can't find some solution, but we definitely ought to try to press to make this happen soon, not in the month of May, such as Zelensky's talking about. That is, a lot of mayhem can occur between now and May, and this thing could get out of hand and escalate tremendously, and that's not what we need.
Yeah. So Zelensky has actually said that he's kind of bounced back and forth because, of course, he's playing to two different audiences. He wants the Russians to know that he is willing to make concessions to achieve peace, but at the same time, he's trying to show to the West that he's the Winston Churchill of Eastern Europe, and he's going to keep fighting to the bitter end, to the last Ukrainian, until all of Ukraine is defeated or occupied, or else the Russians are repelled. But the key point of dispute, and actually Putin, I believe today, it was reported today that Putin would like to, a one-on-one, or rather a presidential level meeting with Zelensky to negotiate the main sticking point, which is the Donbass region. Of course, Zelensky wants to go back to the status quo, where there's no Russian troops in the Donbass region, and the status of those republics is contested. But there's no way that that's going to happen. Putin's not going to agree to go back to the status quo when he's already, had so many costs in terms of, the loss of reportedly, a few thousand Russian troops, as well as these, massive crushing economic sanctions. So he's going to want to have something to show, where he's going to keep fighting to the bitter end and probably escalate to the nuclear level. And what he's asking for is for the Ukraine to recognize that Crimea as part of Russia, of course, and that's a done deal. There's no really real dispute there at this point, since that happened 8 years ago. And then also for them to recognize the independence of the Donetsk People's Republic, as well as the Luhansk People's Republic, along their constitutional borders. So before the Russians invaded, the Russians only controlled the easternmost populous third of those two provinces. Were Ukraine to lose both of those, that would amount to a loss of roughly 6% of their population and territory under their control at the beginning of the invasion. So that's why I use the percentage, 94%. The Russians would commit to withdraw 94% of their forces from Ukraine on a permanent basis. And I think that should be acceptable. I don't think it's appeasement. It's not appeasement when your choices are so stark. And this is happening, by the way, this is happening on Russia's border. People don't realize it, but Ukraine, there's been all these red lines that Biden has crossed. Every red line that Putin has set down, Biden's crossed, with the exception of actually sending troops or U.S. NATO aircraft into Ukraine. And but what people don't realize is that Ukraine itself is the Russian red line. That's why this war started, because there's no bigger red line than Ukraine. Ukraine is the largest, it's the most important former Soviet republic. And it's essentially, we signed a strategic partnership with Ukraine back in November, Biden did, on November 10th, in which the US committed to support NATO membership and EU membership for Ukraine. That was extremely provocative. And Putin responded directly the following month by massing, 100,000 troops on Ukraine's borders. And, of course, on the 15th of December, he offered us that peace treaty. As Peter Pry has mentioned, most of those terms were actually in the U.S. national security interest to accept. Perhaps the only one that was more onerous is that we would withdraw all of our nuclear weapons, just our 150 B-61 gravity bombs that we have at 5 different bases in NATO. We'd certainly have to get some concessions from the Russians in return before we were willing to do that. But it is something that we could do. And the bigger picture, of course, even the Biden administration admits that China is the main threat. We're having all this focus on Russia, and everything we're doing against Russia is pushing them closer together in their military alliance with China. They're becoming more reliant, they're closer allies. China's pledge that there's nothing they won't do to support Russia. There's no limits to their alliance with Russia, which has existed, by the way, for over 20 years, and I've been warning about it since 2000. Our policymakers refused to admit the existence of the Sino-Russian alliance until just late last year, when it was they were making multiple proclamations of how close allies they really were. So there's been a tremendous amount of ignorance and willful naivete, and sticking their collective heads in the sand and ignoring the existential threat posed by this military alliance, which is orders of magnitude more powerful than anything we faced from the Axis powers during World War II.
Absolutely. So, well, people can, I will show a website here that people can go to just to contact their Congress critters. Hang on. You want to contact your Congress critters and opine. This is a place you can go to. It's got an action center here, and it will tell you how to well, that's some alerts we've got. This tells you how to make your voices count, how to track bills, how to contact your state, how to find your U.S. congressman, your U.S. senators, and by sending an email, call in, right? Oh yeah, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is address the White House. I don't think the White House is in there, but this is a recap of the several websites you can use as resources for this. So there you go, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, by the way. So that's freedomrestorationfoundation.org. The link will be in the show notes and pin notes. So there you go. David, what's your closing word? What needs to happen? What can my viewers do?
So your viewers should go to our website at emptaskforce.us. There you can find a volunteer form to tell us where you're located, and we can put you in touch with our state leadership. Perhaps even you might be qualified to serve in our state leadership. There are several states that the U.S. EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security where we don't have a full state leadership appointed yet. And you can also donate. We have a donate button. And then there's resources primarily on the right side where Dr. Peter Pry has a number of books and articles that are referred to. And then I have a couple on the top of that red, the red right side red area as well under latest news. And then I also have a recent presentation under resources, which I gave at a congressional town hall meeting just last month, which is I term an America First national security strategy to ensure America's national survival under the resources tab. And that kind of demonstrates, for your viewers, a lot of kind of what we did wrong. We started beginning with World War I. We got involved with the Allied side and transformed what would have been a status quo peace, a compromise peace that could have averted the rise of Nazism and communism and the Jewish Holocaust in World War II. And we transformed it into a very punitive peace against Germany that caused them to resolve to reunify their country as we broke Germany in two. And a lot of other mistakes, allying with the Soviet Union in our unholy alliance with the Soviets and helping them to conquer 1/3 of the world's people and territory from during and immediately after World War II, especially with the fall of China. We failed to follow Patton's call to liberate Eastern Europe from Soviet control in 1945, and then refused MacArthur's call to liberate China and North Korea from communism in 1951. But these are the resources that I'd recommend your listeners to share with their members of Congress. You can also go to if you look up David T Pyne, national interest on Google, you can find my articles and my most recent, 9 articles, 8 or 9 articles. All of those are very, very important articles that you could share with members of Congress, as well as the EMP Task Force report here on our website at the top of the red bar on the right. So those are all some really important things that I think we could do. What we really need to do is we need to have more members of Congress on the Republican side that are willing to take a stand and put America first and argue against this, this policy of national suicide that Biden and the neoconservative Republicans are supporting, and call for an end to this war, for Biden to mediate an end to this war, to prevent it escalating from World War II to World War III between the U.S. and Russia, something that would be extremely destructive and would likely cause the end of our nation.
There we go. Oh yeah, I need to talk to Glenn Rhodes about updating the leadership page. I'm the Alabama state director, but it's not show up on here yet. So, and by the way, I'm going to have Glenn Rhodes on. He's also very active in this organization. He is going to be on here Monday. He's going to be on my channel Monday. So
that's great.
And he's going to be talking about, this is Glenn Rhodes. He's going to be talking about the great progress that's been made in Colorado. They've really got some things shaking in Colorado. Great examples for what can be done to get our grid hardened on a state-by-state basis. So they're having some enormous success there. So
Glenn's he's doing some really exciting work and making a lot of progress in hardening Colorado's electrical grid. That's really he's really pioneering the way for what we're trying to accomplish. You know, we've kind of hit a hard stop in our attempts to make progress at the national level and persuade members of Congress to pass grid hardening legislation. But at the state level, it's much easier, much more. You know, we're much closer to state legislators. They actually take our calls. They want to meet with us. I've actually met with members of Congress in my capacity as the congressional liaison for the EMP task force, of course. But that's the way to do it. And that's the best book for your listeners to buy if you want to get involved at the state level and buy Blackout Wars.
Yeah, I'm holding it up right now. This book right here, Blackout Wars, written by Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. It shows some states on there. Some of the first ones that were showing progress toward that direction, although there've been some backsliding in that progress. So we really got to work it. But this is the one I got personally signed by Dr. Pry. This is a really good book. It's full of letters, example letters, and all kind of things that you can do and write, how to get involved. And I would have to say Glenn Rhodes has managed to take this to the next level. And hopefully we can replicate that in a lot of other states. My problem here in Alabama is that a whole lot of our power and a whole lot here in the Southeast comes from a federal authority, the TVA, which doesn't have the same accountability chain. So that's going to take a whole nother approach to figure out how to crack that part. But we have met, you know, I had Dr. Pry and we had Dr. Steve Nixon, who's an Army EMP expert, and I all went to Montgomery and testified before our state our state EMA, Emergency Management Association director. We had a special projects coordinator for the governor, Governor Kay Ivey. We had a representative for Alabama Power, and we had the head of our Alabama Public Services Commission, Twinkle Kavanaugh, and that is her name, all at this meeting. And we had there was I don't know, 20 different representatives from the state that listened intently to what we had to say, and they took it seriously. And then they had a little closed door meeting upon themselves after we got through with our presentations. But and you know, we also talked about, well, we went into a lot of stuff, but also I'm going to have a meeting with Colonel Tommy Waller Tuesday, talking about what we need to do to secure our spent fuel rods. So everybody stay tuned for that. See, what I'm telling you guys is a lot of people don't realize that they'll see a title on here and they'll think, oh, it's just all fear porn and blah, 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 and they run. Now you need to listen to the videos through and think, because toward the end, we talk about solutions. What can we do? Now you may not agree with every solution we put out here, but we're trying to fix things. That's what we're trying to do. So and we're showing you how you can take action to do things, whether it be contacting politicians, it might be your Public Services Commission, Nuclear Regulatory Council, the things that Mike Maybe is doing, and I'm showing him on my channel several times, and I'm showing you his website, the things he's doing to uncover the things that the industry is trying to sweep under the rug. And it's amazing how they're actually turning our tax dollars against us to fight, and using our tax dollars to fight our ability to secure our web. So, you know, I mean, our grid, it's crazy, the kind of corruption. In fact, they're using our tax dollars really to fund some of the lobbying. So it's well, not just the tax dollars, it's really your utility bills. That's where your utility bills, a lot of it's going to. It's a lot of the money you pay in your utility bills is going to the system lobbying Congress to not protect you and do the things they ought to done. And if they had taken all the money they'd spent on this lobby to date, we'd had a secure grid.
Yeah, and sadly, the lobby against securing the grid is actually been thoroughly infiltrated by the Chinese. So we have a situation where the communist Chinese are funneling money to those who oppose hardening the grid in order to keep us as vulnerable as possible. And they even have, as I'm sure your other guests have discussed, we have 300 large Chinese transformers that the Obama-Biden administration allowed into our power grid. So without even using other cyber attack means or EMP attack means, they could potentially turn off our grid just using those 300 large transformers with backdoors.
Well, we believe that some of those back doors are like cell phones. They can call home to Beijing, not ET. They call home to Beijing, and they can report on what they're doing, the status, what the loads are, and be used to shut the system down. So we it's awful what we've allowed to happen, but we've got a community of people here that are working to try to fix it. And what we're community. Most everybody in this community is volunteers. We're doing this stuff, so maybe one or two of us, but there's dozens of us working here. We're giving up our free time, and that's precious time to us to promote defense of our power grid, because we know what our country faces if it goes down. A lot of us have put a lot of our own personal money in this, and that includes myself. Even at the Freedom Restoration Foundation website, I pay for that. There's a lot of things that we've taken on to do to try to promote freedom and to the security of our lives here at home. So that's why, when somebody asks, they put a donate button out there, something like that, help them out, because these things, the conferences are expensive, travel is expensive, producing videos is expensive, especially documentaries like David Pyne, not David Pyne, but David Tice,
Yeah.
which I just had him on my channel, and I'll have David Womack back on my channel again, hopefully before too long. He's producing another documentary, and these things take a lot of time, a lot of money. So please support these people when you can. All right, you got a closing word?
Yeah, I just want to say that this is a dangerous time. We're under imminent threat of a major Russian cyber attack that could happen at any time due to our foolish policies that we're pursuing and waging this undeclared war against Russia. So the sooner we can end this war, the sooner we can dial back our economic sanctions and suspend our military aid to Ukraine, while also, getting a just peace and getting the best possible peace deal we can that protects Ukraine from future aggression. The better off we'll be, and the more likely we'll be able to avoid a cyber EMP or nuclear World War III with Russia and China. China is the most likely time for them to invade Taiwan. Is best months sea-wise is April or October. And I was told by a former U.S. Navy commander that April is actually the best month. So I think we're safe against EMP and nuclear attack this month. Next month may be a different story. We don't want to fight Russia and China at the same time. We need to end this war this month, and stop the tensions, so that if China invades, we don't have to worry about that at the same time.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And yeah, I've been telling people that the sea states were too bad for a Taiwan invasion through the wintertime and up into March. So yeah, they're just now starting to get better. But yeah, and it's the same way if you operate out. I've been out in the Gulf of Mexico in some crazy weather too, so I know what that's like. So David, thank you very much for joining us again. I'm sure we'll have you back sometime in the not too distant future. Hopefully the news will be a little rosier than it is now. Take care of yourself, and thank you everyone for watching. And with that, I'm going to say, great.